Hello everyone, Ace here, and today let's talk about the fall of the establishment. Something that I would argue is evident given the results of the recent US presidential election. An election in which the establishment did everything they possibly could to prevent Donald J. Trump from winning. This included nearly a decade of directly comparing Donald Trump to Hitler, of mainstream news media outlets arguing that Donald Trump would start World War III and end the entire world. It also included Donald Trump facing the weaponization of the legal system to the tune of politically motivated criminal cases being made against him. It included the establishment throwing as much money as possible into the campaign of his opposition, Kamala Harris, buying her as many ads as she could ever want. It also included the censorship of his supporters. Worse still, it included the establishment being deliberately lax in security in protecting Donald Trump during his campaign, leading to multiple assassination attempts being made against him, with lives being tragically lost in at least one instance. Finally, there is also reason to question whether or not the results were free of any funny business. And yet, despite all of these things, Donald J. Trump not only won the election, but did so with the popular vote. Nearly 4 million more votes so far in comparison to his opposition, Kamala Harris, who, as we've already mentioned, had every single advantage possible by contrast. The fact that Trump managed to not only win the election, but also win by a significant margin the popular vote as well, despite all of these massive disadvantages, it does very clearly demonstrate that the establishment's ability to ensure that the correct person wins the election has been absolutely compromised. But the question is ultimately what got us here, to which I would argue that there are multiple factors at play that each have their own importance. And so for the sake of it, I will go over what I believe are the main factors. For a start, I would have to argue that a significant part of the problem for the establishment has to be the results of the 2020 election. Yes, that was an election that Donald Trump lost, because in part of election fraud favoring Joe Biden. So yes, Trump lost an election that was rigged against him. However, that is getting a bit off topic to what I'm focusing on here, because getting to why the results of the 2020 election have been detrimental to the establishment, I would have to say it is because the mainstream Democrats and the more spineless elements of the Republican Party fettered themselves to what can be charitably described as a walking corpse of a president. Joe Biden, the supposedly most popular president in US history, in terms of the sheer number of votes that he has received, has had some of the most abysmal performance in living memory as far as presidents are concerned. Biden was always a weak president. He was always an indecisive president. He was always an incompetent president. He failed in Afghanistan, he failed in dealing with natural disasters, and he especially failed with the economy. And those are just a handful of the major policy fuck-ups that can be attributed to Joe Biden. That is not counting the numerous gaffes he made before and during his career as president. Gaffes that the establishment had to constantly try to defend. Not only did this naturally further erase whatever trust people had in mainstream news media, it also went on to further erase any trust they may have had in the government's ability to actually do its job. It turns out when people are struggling to afford groceries, then no amount of telling them that things are better now than they ever were is going to magically make them not notice that they are struggling to buy groceries. On that subject, it's worth noting that Biden's performance as far as the economy was concerned is so bad that his presidential years have become a fantastic critique on the faults of Keynesian economics. It turns out trying to throw more money at the problem isn't a magical cure-all, and Biden's efforts at government intervention to stabilize the economy has instead only served to further backfire. However, it is not just the Biden presidency or these past 4 years that have led to the fall of the establishment, as it wasn't just the bread in the bread and circus equation that has eroded. The entertainment industry has been going through its own decline for significantly longer. Wokeness has been getting inserted into media such as video games for over a decade at this point, and the results have been absolutely disastrous for mainstream entertainment. In the case of video games, not only on average are video games less technically capable as opposed to titles from 20 years ago, which is to say that on average games these days are more bug-ridden than ever, it is also self-evident that the writing and even basic gameplay mechanics have also taken a nosedive as a result as well. Now, to be clear, I am talking about the AAA portion of the industry specifically, as well as talking about that portion of the industry as a whole, as exceptions to the rule can be found. However, these are, again, at the end of the day, exceptions to the rule, rather than the norm themselves. Unfortunately, though, this is not a phenomena that is exclusive to video games, and it is instead a pattern that has been replicated with essentially all other forms of entertainment. This is because wokeness itself is a product of the Marxist theory of empire, which argues that all pieces of entertainment can and should be subverted in order to convert the masses into a more leftist line of reasoning. This is basic Gramscian thought in a nutshell, and its great experiment through the Marxist theory of empire has demonstrated that Gramsci was simply wrong, as the masses have instead chosen to rise up and reject wokeness as a whole. Part of the reason is, of course, simply because the entertainment is less entertaining, and people have been noticing this very real decline in quality. It has also, however, and more importantly for the establishment, resulted in people getting less distracted by the entertainment, resulting in them instead paying far more attention to real-life politics. Like it or not, the far left have succeeded in largely eradicating the so-called normie of old, as to be a so-called normie in this day and age would require you to live under a rock to such a degree that you would be an extremely fringe weirdo, at which point you can't even be called a normie anymore. However, this decision to politicize the general population has, as I've said, been outright disastrous for both the far left and the establishment, as the natural reaction to taking away people's escapism is that they will, of course, turn against you, and quite rightly so. This has, however, done more than hurt the political influence of the establishment, which is to say the government, mainstream news media, as well as major corporations that embrace globalism, as the cost has been very financial as well, to the degree that major news media outlets are facing massive layoffs, and even major entertainment corporations such as Disney are struggling to be financially successful on their own. Taking it a step further, even BlackRock has a finite amount of resources, and can and will eventually run out of them when pressed hard enough. So to answer why the establishment is currently collapsing before our very eyes, and why populist movements are springing up in various Western countries, it ultimately comes down to the erasure of the bread and the circuses. People are finding it harder and harder to be able to afford food, and instead of offering escapism, much of today's entertainment can be accurately described as propaganda forcefully inserting real-life politics, regardless of the cost. The results of these facts are plain to see, yet there is ultimately hope at the end of the tunnel. The incompetence of old can be replaced. Wokeness itself is already on the decline, as even before the election it was already proving far too detrimental, to the point of being economically unfeasible even for the largest of corporations, and no amount of rebranding wokeness has been successful. So as stated, it is on the decline. Furthermore, a change in economic policy, such as the change suggested by Donald Trump, may very well be exactly what's needed to turn the economy itself around, meaning that the bread and the circuses will once again thrive. This will not, however, be a return to the late 90s and early 2000s. That, however, is not inherently bad. Instead, there is a very real chance to have a new golden age, one in which may have the best qualities of the late 90s and early 2000s, but also hopefully avoids the many pitfalls that occurred in those times as well. Perhaps that is me being overly optimistic, but I do believe ultimately that it is possible that under the right circumstances that can become the future. But in any case, this has been Ace. Hope to see you guys again soon. Take care. Ace out.